Hey everyone, I want to do a quick chat on something that is a little bit more social than a technical design choice, but it has to do with how you design the system from the ground up. And specifically, it's this idea that we are not all on the same playing field. I think there's something systemically wrong about that perpetuates a very large amount of social inequalities. And this is the argument that a number of individuals identify when they think of scaling solutions for blockchains. And certainly, there are things that will need to happen off chain to give you the throughput, the scalability, and such that some applications need. Understand it, makes sense. There are certain places where that's the path to go down. But when that happens, and when you design these initial blockchains in the first place, and even just thinking about what's best for society, I want to share sort of my viewpoint on, you know, I don't see a successful society as one where the poor have cars. A successful society is one where the rich take the subway. It's one where the basic public infrastructure is so exceptional that it becomes the de facto standard for everyone. And certainly there are cases where you go outside of that norm, but it should be the standard. It should be exceptional, and it should satisfy everyone's requirements on its own. And it should, most importantly, put everyone on the same playing field. Because when everyone's on the same playing field, opportunity isn't for just the select few. Education isn't, again, for the select few. And prosperity ultimately isn't just for the select few. It's about feeling ambition and making sure that anyone can move forward with their ideas, with their lives, and with their passions without the entrapment of an unfair system that they're working in. I remember when I was 12, I made a video game. 13, had it greenlit, put on Steam, and the last step of having that game live was to put in my bank account information. And my parents wouldn't give me my bank account information because they were, it's not safe. You're going to lose the money and such and such. And, as a kid, I didn't know how to open a bank account. So it was a shame for me. I was like, gosh, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'd been doing all this work and, well, nothing happened because I just didn't have access to that financial system. And it's something that's stuck with me. And, I went back to trading, and I was trading in Team Fortress, and then just started trading in securities and didn't really come back to it for a while. But I saw it firsthand there too, when I would try to open an account and I couldn't because I was underage. So I had to trade under my mom's name, and it was this huge hassle every day to get into the account, to have the portfolio, and to do the transactions, and then it wasn't taxed properly, and it was just this nightmare. And of course, back then there were these huge transaction fees. So it was always sort of fighting a battle up against the hill where there were systems that I didn't really have full access to, I didn't have equal access to, and I certainly didn't have the access that the market makers had to it. And it always irked me. I mean, why is it that someone like you and I can't just go and give our money and tender it and trade with someone else on the floor of NYSE or the exchanges? And It's just they call it scalability challenges, and in a physical world maybe, but it's an electronic world. To add another bit on a computer, it's nothing. To throw another account in a system, unless that system perpetuates credit risk and there's a material chance of default if someone that's not creditworthy joins in, which is not how you should design financial systems. Unless that's the case, there's no reason to exclude the investors with smaller accounts. The investors outside of this great nation, or the investors that might have a better trading experience and understanding. And it's certainly easier to intermediate and regulate one or a few dozen brokers or ATSs or a couple hundred institutions globally. It's certainly easier to force everyone through these middlemen front end. It's certainly easier to leave all of the hard regulating questions behind the walls and the gates a few corporations. But it's not good for investors, it's not good for regulators, it's not good for issuers. You don't have good outcomes. It's happened time and time again that these institutions fail us as a society. And that's why I think it's so important that we get everyone back on the same playing field. Back into a world where the transactions are understandable. And back into a place where the oversight doesn't require a PhD. I remember hearing a story about some of the examiners looking into Madoff, and a couple of days before walking into his office, they were asking about what options were. And that's just scratching the surface on an infinite complexity of these risky derivatives perpetuated for the profit of central banks, central brokers, and central clearinghouses that extracts wealth from the vast majority of the population. I think we know for who. So, I haven't mentioned that before, but it's a really important concept. It's not about giving every poor person a car. It's about making the public transit so good that everyone uses it. That's when the incentives, the concerns, and the usage of everyone can conjoin into a single product that everyone collectively agrees is important enough to improve on, to oversee, and to effectively regulate. And with the division and turmoil in our nation today, it just doesn't make sense to me that we would have anything other than a unified solution when it comes to these simple public utilities that stand as the basis of our society and enable not just the enjoyment of the wealthy, but the activity, performance of the rest of us in a way that fuels the overarching growth of our great nation. It's about building something not to serve the short-term interests, which I understand is necessary to serve the short-term interests of a couple stakeholders when you're at the early days of something and the world doesn't understand its significance and it's not abundantly clear and you're taking risk and you're developing, you're building out that next generation. I get it. But once it's established and most importantly, I get that they're always renovating real estate, and it's this physical thing, and it's always getting upgraded, and fine, sure, yeah, there are companies like that are always innovating, always building the next thing, always doing the next idea, and for them, the profit motive makes sense. It works. It instills the best of what society has to offer, but for a very narrow scope, for the railroads that get built once and they practically never change. Not for the trains on them, fine, but for the railroads, for the tunnels, for the launch pads, for this long-standing infrastructure where it fundamentally never really changes. That's where it doesn't seem like it makes sense, because 100 years down the line, you're gonna have this for-profit company that built it, and it's like, why? What maintenance do you need to do on an airport? Every now and then every year you clean up the runway, and maybe you need to expand it, but you're expanding it not because of not necessarily because of a profit motive, but because of a growth of the society and the tax base around it. And so there are things like that that just make sense to build once, to build with efficient capital allocation, and just have it be done with. And you look at the failure of, I guess it was Richard Branson's, and his efforts in Bright Line South, and then that getting turned over to the state. It's because these day-to-day, it's not because it's more efficient that way, but it's because it's something that's more for the public good, that has all these other net tangible benefits to society. It's not just the trains running and the people moving, but it's the increased business, it's the increased economic mobility, and it's the access that these resources give everyone to partake in an economy connected by these public utilities, an infrastructure that serves everyone equally. It's why the private water companies bear the burden of financial windfalls and downfalls that are removed from the public utilities in legislation crafted by the population. And I just don't see that in the most critical of infrastructure for a capitalist society, being the banking, the securities, and the trading. The most important aspect of all commerce is ensnared in the hands of a collective few that have strongly misaligned interests with the vast majority of this globe and beyond. And that's why I am extraordinarily skeptical of the gatekeeping prospects of scaling solutions that put the trust in the hands of a board of directors, CEO, and ultimately corruptible few, when in reality it's something so important that it just needs to be given directly to the hands of the users themselves.